We are transitioning now into our final session of the annual conference and indeed of the month of March. And it does seem fitting that when we talk about global food system renewal, we should probably end with the discussion with the policymakers and what they are going to do about it. And David has certainly helped to stimulate that discussion. As Stephen said, in a moment, we'll be handing back to him for introduce our two speakers that will join him in conversation on this topic. But before we do that, yesterday we had the opportunity to talk to the new US Secretary for Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, in the United States, obviously, and ask him what his perspective is on the renewal of the global food system and what the Biden administration is going to do about it. Here's what he had to say. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. It's truly terrific to have you with us, and thank you very much for making the time. I want to start by asking you a question about how the new Biden administration sees this need to renew the global food and agriculture system, and perhaps in particular, what your priorities are going to be over the next 4 years.
Well, I would say that we have essentially 5 significant priorities when it comes to the food and agriculture industry. First and foremost, we all have the responsibility of developing and producing sufficient quantities and quality of food that is available and accessible to all in an equitable way. And obviously it has to be safe. We want it to be produced in an economically and environmentally sustainable way using regenerative practices for farms of all sizes and production methods. We think markets need to be open, transparent, rules-based, and competitive. And we think the system needs to be, in the light of COVID, more resilient and operates in an equitable fashion. And the Biden-Harris administration has set out as a goal, 0 net emissions from agriculture by the year 2050. So we need to work towards that goal to reduce the greenhouse gas footprint of agriculture generally. I think these are aggressive goals. I think they are certainly doable in terms of us taking very significant steps forward in the next 4 years.
I want to pick up, Mr. Secretary, if I may, on this topic of climate change, and you touched on it a little bit there in terms of your reference to regenerative farm practices. There are some that argue that agriculture is part of the problem for climate change, that it needs to get its house in order first before it does anything else. On the other hand, there are others that argue equally compellingly that agriculture is also part of the solution to climate change, particularly in terms of expanding natural carbon sinks, for example. What's your view of that?
Well, I think Bill Gates has a new book out that basically quantifies the challenge. 51 billion tons of emissions going up into the atmosphere every single year from our global activities, 19% of it connected to agriculture in his book. And we have to get to net zero if we are to keep the temperature increases within manageable levels. Ag has to be an essential partner in this effort. I think we have to look at this from a challenge standpoint, but also from an opportunity standpoint. You know, I think the Department of Agriculture in the U.S. is going to be focused on encouraging climate-smart agricultural practices, everything from no-till, rotational grazing, things of that nature, utilizing our tools in the regular Farm Bill programs that we have to encourage and incent that type of activity. We think there's an opportunity as well for more efficient production, the ability to use science to figure out ways in which root systems, for example, can be genetically engineered to embrace and to be able to store more carbon as the years go on. Obviously, vertical farming, also an opportunity for us to increase efficiency. Renewable energy produced on the farm by capturing methane and reusing it or reducing the amount of methane. And we think there's also opportunities, you mentioned, to sequester carbon and to store it in land. We obviously look for financial incentives to do this in a way that makes sense for farmers. So I think there are multiple ways in which the Department of Agriculture and agriculture in the U.S. can help lead an effort globally to essentially get our footprint down. I know several of our commodities are very anxious to get to that net zero future that the President and Vice President have outlined. And I know some are very, very far along in terms of identifying the technologies that may allow us to get to net zero in the near term.
I want to pick up on that point that it is there about research and innovation. We had a transatlantic dialogue last week as part of the Forum's Month of March program. We looked at this question of research and innovation in agriculture. How important do you think it is that we do more both in the public sector and the private sector to invest in research and innovation, not just in technologies, but also in practice as well, whether it's on farm or indeed down the value chain?
Well, I would say it's absolutely critical. If we're going to have efficient, effective, environmentally sustainable, and economically sustainable practices, innovation and research are critically important. And I think there are a number of things we do at the USDA. We have our own labs that are focused on this. We have our ability to make grants to our land-grant universities and minority serving institutions around the United States that are doing valuable research. We obviously have a private foundation committed to food and agricultural research, but candidly, we have to do a lot more. And we have to do it in a way that makes that research and the technologies and techniques available to farmers in a more affordable way. So there's a challenge there, but I think it's absolutely critical. If you're looking at precision agriculture, the ability to apply very strategically inputs into land, you're going to need research and innovation. If you're going to have a carbon bank or any kind of program that incents and pays for storage of carbon, you're going to have to be able to quantify and measure and verify the results of particular conservation methods. All of that requires research. If you're going to improve root systems so that they can sequester more carbon and do an even better job of that, you're going to need research and innovation. If you're going to incorporate the data that is collected on the farm, you're going to have research and innovation. So I think there's an unlimited research and innovation agenda that has to be developed. And I think we have to figure out ways of sharing information in a way that protects privacy, but also provides essentially the utilization of that data in the most efficient and effective way. So I think there are a tremendous number of areas where we have to invest more and more consistently in food and agricultural research.
Makes perfect sense, Mr. Secretary. I wonder if I could just bring you back to something that you said earlier and we had an exchange on. There is this perspective that, there are those that believe that agriculture needs to do this and on the environmental side they need to do that. How do we bring these stakeholders together to build a greater understanding of what we need to do collectively to renew the food and agriculture system?
Well, I think first and foremost is basically explaining the opportunity side of all of this. I think there's a tendency to focus on the challenge side of the important role that we all have to play in reducing our carbon footprint, our greenhouse gas emissions, so that we ultimately keep this temperature control within a range where we can adapt and mitigate. I think first and foremost we have to educate people about that. But when we do, I think we have to focus on the fact that this creates a real opportunity. Certainly in agriculture, it creates an opportunity for essentially, in a sense, new commodities, new revenue streams, new income streams for farmers. And I think we also have to point out that by doing many of these practices, farmers will not only create new revenue streams, but they'll also improve soil health and water quality, which I know are very important to farmers all over the world. We are, in the U.S., are losing too much topsoil. We've got to reverse that effort if we want to continue to grow and produce everything that's necessary to feed an ever-increasing and hungry world. I think there are a vast array of opportunities here that we need to focus on and we need to communicate in order to get people more willing to listen. Look, farmers all over the world understand and appreciate these weather conditions that are now making it more difficult every single year, whether it's intense droughts or more intense storms, longer droughts, floods that are astronomical in size and scope, wildfires in our country that are taking over some of our forests. These are all climate-related events, and I think as farmers have to deal and cope with more frequent intense storms and floods and droughts of longer duration, they are beginning to understand that it's in their best interest from their farming operation to embrace this. And frankly, I think the market is also sending a very serious signal about the fact that consumers all over the world are interested in more sustainably produced food. So the market conditions, the environmental conditions, the economic opportunity that's presented here, I think are all compelling messages that can get farmers and ranchers and producers all over the world interested and focused on this.
I think, as you say, there are common challenges wherever you are in the world, but also common opportunities. And that's certainly something that we've been looking at the forum over the past month or so. A final question, if I may, Mr. Secretary. The UN Food Systems Summit takes place later this year. We'll also be hearing from Agnes Kalibata on this. I wonder, what role do you see it playing in accelerating food system renewal? And perhaps within that, how important do you think collaboration will be between the United States and the European Union in an area which, to be frank, the two sides have not always found it easy to agree on?
Well, here's the good news. I think there's a common vision. The vision is that we indeed will focus on an agriculture and a food and agriculture system that is indeed environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable. We may have different ways to get to that goal, to that vision, but I think it is a shared vision, and I think it's the right vision. You can't have farming practices that are economically viable but environmentally dangerous and difficult, and establishing topsoil loss and creating water quality issues. At the same time, you can't require farmers to do all of this activity to be environmentally sustainable without making it economically viable. They simply won't be able to stay in business, and to the extent that we're concerned about the size of farms, the need for diversity in farming, we may be jeopardizing that if we don't make it economically sustainable. So I think the summit gives us an opportunity as a global community, if you will, to commit ourselves to that future of a net zero emission agriculture, to commit ourselves to collaborate to figure out best practices in terms of climate smart and regenerative agricultural practices, to figure out creative ways to provide the financial support and help and the reward and the incentive to make it happen. And then to make sure that our trading systems, our methods of collaborating and cooperating in terms of the transfer of goods, that we don't create barriers based on our way of doing things, that we understand that there's a need for an open and transparent and competitive market that is rules-based, that is science-based, and is not essentially designed to create barriers based on a particular method of production, if the science supports that method of production, if it does in fact help to advance a more sustainable environmental and societal and economic basis for agriculture and food. I think there's a tremendous opportunity here for agriculture not only to do its work, but also to provide leadership to other industries, the transportation industry, the construction industry, the ability for us to, as a global community, to commit ourselves to the steps that need to be taken in order to get our carbon footprint down to the point where we can cope and manage with a changing climate. So I'm optimistic about this. I think the UN Food Summit has an opportunity for us to have that collaborative conversation, to understand that we have a common vision, and to celebrate that common vision, to understand the importance of making sure that that food is available, that food is affordable, that there's equity in the distribution of food, that we don't have a trading system that creates barriers unnecessarily. I think there's a great opportunity for us to have a very positive and constructive conversation at this summit, and the U.S. is, I think, anxious to be part of that. And I think that President Biden and Vice President Harris's commitment to a net zero emission agriculture in the U.S. by 2050 is a good indication of the desire for U.S. To participate fully in this conference.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that upbeat message and indeed rallying call. We'll be hearing from Executive Vice President Timmermans and Agnes Kalibata later on. But for now, Tom Vilsack, United States Secretary for Agriculture, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.